Good afternoon and welcome to CEC-UGC lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about gender and work in agrarian society, and this is part of the series Sociology of Work. In this lecture, we know that there is a lot of change that has taken place in the economy and society, and the idea that how we do look into the women's relation in agrarian society, because a lot of sociological theories, say in the early 1930s, 40s, would give us an argument that more women in agrarian sectors are working. So does with the coming in of the technology or kind of industrialization of agrarian structure, do we kind of see any kind of change in the gender work relation? And here we will be referring specifically to Prem Chaudhary's ethnographic work on Haryana to understand gender work in agrarian society. So we know that specifically in terms of the changes that we see, that agroeconomic changes has taken place because of the green revolution, the white revolution, and also because of the shift which was taking place from the subsistence economy to a market based economy, and the understanding that even the rural agrarian structure kind of underwent industrial changes. And why are we looking into Haryana as a case study? Because the amount of economic transformation that the state has undergone, it has become the richest, second richest state in the country. So in an economy which is flourishing, an economy which is doing so well, we need to look into where do we place the women, or where do we look into the gender relations in such an economy. So how has this change from, say, a subsistence economy to a flourishing economy impacted the nature of work that women do? And for that we kind of look into whether is there kind of any understanding where the improvement in the economy of region impacts the status of women in society. So how do we look into the rural women and agricultural work? So specifically, again, as to repeat, this is a case study in Haryana carried out by Prem Chaudhary, and we are referring to this reading, where she is talking about different levels of the state's economy and women's work, and she will be looking into all these impact of green revolution, white revolution, also migration of men from rural areas to and the cultural ethic of women as custodian of the family and the community. So how has all these impacted women's position in rural agrarian sector? Women working in agricultural processing and animal husbandry, and this is something which was also done prior to the changes or transformation. Women in agricultural agrarian society has always been an active worker, and so does kind of look that do they continue doing the same amount of work, and if they are such kind of contributing to the overall economy or the progress of the economy, what is the compensation or the return that they get? So we see a high participation of Haryanvi women along with the cultural devaluation, and that is the main argument, that though the participation is kind of increasing, women's work has not been kind of seen any improvement in valuation. Rather, on the contrary, there is a devaluation of women's work in rural areas. So what is the work nature of women's work? And here the focus is to understand two spheres of work. One, agricultural as well as animal husbandry work. What kind of work that women are doing in agricultural process as well as animal husbandry work. So when we look into nature of women's work, we see the female family workers from land owning household. So women have always been part of the family labor, because in rural agrarian sector, especially when we had this kind of agricultural activity, it was the family labor which was important, and women were active members. Female agricultural wage earner. So rather than not only working on your own field, because of the increase in agricultural productivity, women have started taking up wage work. That is, they would be working on someone else's work and get a wage in return. So before we go into the kind of status of women, it's very important to understand the conditions of Haryana and its economy. And here we see that during the colonial period, Haryana was kind of backward and an underdeveloped region. The British colonial rule also gave very low priority all these irrigation policies of the colonial period had kept this area completely starved on the basic requirement, because obviously the Britishers had the idea to invest only in areas where they could reap profit. So it was a place which was already backward, there was not much of a scope of development, very less focus by the colonial period rulers were given on this. In the subsistence economy, the total dependence on family labor. For cultivations, women were regarded as economic asset and were even popularly acknowledged too. So in sociology, we know that women work in agrarian rural area is valued. Why? Because to get another hand to work on your field, you have to kind of give a wage, or you have to give a compensation. Women were kind of being done without paying anything. So they were working in the family and it was an asset. So they were not kind of disregarded, but they were given a high value. Women did all forms of agricultural work except plowing, digging and driving a cart. So there was a domestic division of labor even here, where women would be kind of doing the more of the softer kind of where physical labor would be less. Men would be doing plowing, which would require more physical labor. So this was across social division, because it was prevalent among all cultivating castes. It was not only that the lower caste women were working in the field, but across caste women were working in the field. And the Green Revolution and White Revolution that talks about the bringing in of technology and high quality seeds kind of did not bring decline to the participation of women, but on the contrary, it kind of women were continuing to work in the field. And so why were they continuing to work in the field? The factors for the persistence of women participation, number one is that there was an extensive use of female family labor, because labor, if you had to get from outside the family, obviously it was expensive, and women were kind of an economic asset, so they were continuing to work in the field. In animal husbandry, which is the second most important sector of rural economy, almost all work from intensive labor to supervisory is performed by female, regardless of division of class and caste. So it is something which is found among all women. Both findings indicate at a high participation of women despite change economy from subsistence to market base. So these changes which is taking place either because of use of technology or because of larger changes taking place in the urban area, the participation of women has not kind of been affected. There is a persistence increase in the participation of women in both agricultural and husbandry. Animal husbandry. So then how does this devaluation of women starts? The number is high, they are still working, but the value that was being attached to women's work has come down. So the cultural devaluation continues. Women work is still considered as inferior, secondary, supplementary to that of men. So they are an economic asset because they have to ensure that their husband, father or any male colleague, they kind of continue to reap the benefit. So it is their involvement in the work is not because of women per se, but because of their obligations to ensure that the kin relations kind of do well in their economy. So it has led to conspicuous emergence of a dominant man in control. So the entire kind of idea that they are doing work is not because any kind of a credit is being assigned to them, but it is kind of their duty, or it is their cultural value to work for the family. So the devaluation of women's work has detrimented further women's position in society. So earlier also the value was low and it has kind of further gone down. So the subordinate status of women is kind of very on the margin. When we look into these changes which has taken place specifically on the Green Revolution, the need of a female family in a skewed economy, because the economy was undergoing change, and they say from a backward economy to almost to a market-based economy. A lot of structural changes was taking place, and this change was not taking place evenly. It was only in areas or in places where the capital was available that transformation was taking places, where the capitalists were, or in areas where rich farmers were not there, rich households were not there, it continued to remain underdeveloped. So green revolution was based on capital intensive growth. It was only helpful for people who had resources. So it was a capital intensive process where it kind of only added to the capital that the capitalist had, and as a result it led to regional imbalance. So some of the regions kind of progressed well because they had the land and the capital, and others kind of remained backward. Green revolution kind of led to an aggravated inequality within the peasantry. And obviously, because the social structure was kind of getting more and more unequal, women had to face the repercussion, and if impacted differently. So women no longer remains a homogeneous category. The caste, class, the region identity of the women became significant, and the impact was differently faced. So when we look into the impact of green revolution, we refer to the work of Sheila Bhalla, who says that if we look into the impact, the entire of the state can be divided into three regions. So the the area which has kind of had the most important impact is the Karnal district and its adjacent area. Largest irrigated land, and this was the area where the farmers were able to use the HY high yielding variety seeds for the at the earliest. Then the second part of the Haryana is Hisar and parts of Rohtak, where the 14% of the total cropped area was only a small percentage was under HYV category. And then you had the third area, which was the arid area, which is the area bordering Rajasthan. And this area, because it was already there was lack of irrigation, and it kind of was not able to take the benefit of revolution, and it continued to be technologically backward. So you have these separate regions in different parts of the state, having been differently influenced by the revolution. And there are two small areas, agroeconomically identifiable regions. They are kind of areas which are in the north, which has a high rainfall, and the other is the second poorest region of Haryana is in terms of Ambala, where the cultivation income is low. So the whole of this region, when we do a regional mapping of in terms of the green revolution, to repeat, it was only the larger farmer, that is those who had high capital and they had kind of a lot of land with them, they were able to reap the benefit of the revolution, and it kind of led to regional imbalance, it led to increase in inequality. But one of the advantage was that because of this, there was kind of industrialization of the agriculture, and this led to increase in the demand of labor. More and more labor were required to work, and so it was kind of not in terms of only men as labor, but also women. So the demand for women labor increased because of the changes that was taking place, and labor cost became very expensive. So here when we see that the labor cost becomes expensive because you have to use certain kind of technology, certain kind of seed. So you need a certain kind of skill base to do that work, and therefore the labor started demanding a higher cost. So what was the outcome was that then the household started depending more on their own women. So the women continue to work as family labor, and the idea was again not that because they were doing a work in order to save out a part of their expenses on outsourcing work labor. it was kind of assumed to be a feminine task or a kind of the obligation of women as wife, as mothers and sister, to support their men, and therefore the participation continued, but devaluation of women's labor was there. So, mechanization has lightened the workload of men. For instance, the use of plow and oxen has obviously, the physical labor has decreased, but women, they kind of continue to do the same amount of labor. So they are loading the tractor, and so the whole idea that they are doing it because for their family, for the benefit of their family, the physical work has increased. So it is not introduced. So when we look into technology, technology has certainly in certain areas, not everywhere, but in certain areas reduced the physical labor of men, but on the contrary, the physical labor of women kind of remains, continues to as it was before the coming in of the technology. So when we look into female family labor, we also need to look into the relation between caste and class. So this use of female family labor is across all caste and class. So it's also something that is kind of found among all. However, the dominating caste like the Jat, Gujjar, Ahirs and other cultivating caste, they are also employing the women as part of their family labor, and have been, those who have been able to take the beneficiaries are also asking the female work on the field. But one thing is important is in terms of class factor. These farmers or agricultural labor, where the income of the family increases, and then it is not kind of requirement for the women to work. That means that they can pay the extra cost to hire a labor, then there is a withdrawal of women from the labor force. So then it is kind of also assigned in terms of the economic status of the family. So if the economic status of the family is good, then the women of the household should not work in the field. So the dominant cultural norms do not consider participation of women in manual work outside the house as lowering to family prestige, but you cannot work in others' field. So if you work in others' field, then it is lowering of his status. So why is that? Because when you are working in your own field, then you are kind of assisting your male counterparts. But if you are working in someone else, then you will lower the status. Why? Because the idea that the family whose women would be going to work in other field is obviously of low economic status. So it kind of, women's working outside the household is associated with the economic status of the family. So this attitude towards agricultural work is reflected in the folklore. So all these songs, folklores and tales, and these are not only kind of recent folklores, but they go back to the days of the Mahabharata, and where the reference is terms of the labor being done by both king and queen. The folklores kind of mention these, and it refers to the idea that agriculture can never be a demeaning task. But it will not be a demeaning task as long as you are doing in your own field. So in keeping with this tradition that kings and queens were also working on their field, men and women, they kind of continue doing family labor. But in places where, so there is an economic bend. In areas where the regions where due to green revolution the economy has improved, the class status of the family has improved, there is withdrawal of labor. But in drought prone areas where it is very difficult to hire a labor from outside, then the female family members cannot afford to withdraw from the labor. Even if they want to, they cannot, because they have to kind of continue to work in the field. So the data, a lot of data was collected in the state of Haryana, and the data according to Prem Chaudhary suggests that there is an extensive use of family labor, and by and large even women from well-to-do families contribute fully to all agricultural tasks. Undoubtedly, there are women who have withdrawn from agricultural work, for example in Karnal, which is the richest green revolution area. So in Karnal, where they are all rich farmers and rich landlords, women don't work in the field. And here again there is a hierarchy which comes in. So women will not do, and you will kind of take the service of the servants who would be paid a wage to do it. So working in the agricultural field specifically for female is attached to the economic status. Certain traditional high caste, with exception of Brahmin like Rajput, Banyas and Khatris, earlier they never allowed to work for the women. So there is also a kind of a caste factor where the upper caste men, women are not supposed to work for outside, because here you have this notion of the men as the primary bread earner, and it kind of brings a lot of disgrace to the family in which women work. So they kind of continue, even if they are in a bad economic status, they will not allow women to work outside the house. So those women who do not perform any agricultural are no standard considered superior. So even if you are working on the field, or if you are not working, it is not kind of never considered as affecting the status of women per se. Her status continues to subordinate, whether she works in the field or she doesn't works in the field. It is just kind of an assisting hand. The value which is attached to women's labor is kind of assisting hand, and where they're not working is because the men control is far more profound, where men folk do not allow their women to go and work. So withdrawal from work is a kind of a phenomena which is observed in the new capitalist land owning class, and so there is a hierarchy which, or there is a kind of a ranked pattern that can be seen. Lower class or the lower caste, larger number of women are working. Middle, it depends on whether the family value suggests that the women can work out. And as we move upper the caste and upper class, a larger percentage of women withdraw from work. So that is important. And then when we look into another reason why women kind of continue to have a high participation in agricultural work is to look into the process of migration and cultural work ethic. So we know that number of factors, one of the most important factor that has allowed women to continue to work as family labor is to kind of sustain the family occupation. And this is also because a large scale migration of men from rural areas to urban area, and especially in areas where green revolution did not bring about drastic change, areas that remained underdeveloped, unprogressed, and the economy was not doing well, men migrated to urban areas in search of better income. And the young educated, they kind of another factor for migration is that many of the young boys in the agrarian sector, they don't want to indulge in agriculture because they don't see it as progressive, or the income that can be coming is not that high. So they don't tend to migrate to urban areas, and family females then are left behind to take care of both the land and the family. So they are kind of doubly burdened. They are also doing the domestic core of taking care of the aged and the children which is in the household. As the same time, they are doing the entire agricultural work because the men have migrated and they are left to do it all by themselves. So in such cases, the intensity of work for women kind of increases. So when we look into migration as a process, then we also understand the cultural work ethic. That is the cultural work ethic where the men are kind of moving after marriage with the understanding that they have someone in terms of being left behind to take care of the family and the agricultural labor. And in that context, it is very important to then see that they are kind of more free, or they are kind of less burdened in terms of looking at it. So even women who are left behind, where the men have migrated and are taking care of the field and the family, the value that is being attached to is not being any further being increased. Why? Because of the whole idea that it is kind of a assumption or maybe a gendered understanding of men and women's work, that women's predominant task is to take care of the family, and therefore not only in terms of the domestic work, but also to look into how the income or the economic conditions of the family is sustained. So, when we look into this and try to understand the relations of women in agrarian sector, and also look into the white revolution in terms of how the white revolution kind of increased the significance of animal husbandry, the onus of doing the larger amount of physical labor was again on women. So we see that the things are changing, economy is changing, technology is changing, but somewhere somehow the gendered understanding of work, it kind of reflects that female subordinate status continues, or what we can say, it persists. So women's as work is something which we can term, when we look into Bourdieu's understanding of taste, as a choice, as a class. So you kind of women not participating in the labor is a kind of a reflection of the class of the family. So, and therefore it does not at any way reflects, or there is no kind of an understanding of women's agency or women's per kind of an involvement, the skills that she has learned and she wants to use. So with this whole understanding of men and women in agrarian sector, we can to refer to the work of Prem Chaudhary. The title is High Participation, Low Evaluation, Women and Work in Rural Haryana. And this gives us a good coverage of understanding gender and work in agrarian structure. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.